The smell of roasted chicken filled every corner of Grandma Rose's old house that Sunday afternoon. It was the kind of smell that made you feel like you were 8 years old again, standing on your tiptoes to peek into the oven. The dining room buzzed with the usual family chatter, Uncle Mike arguing about football scores, Aunt Linda sharing neighborhood gossip, and the cousins debating which movie to watch later. Lisa sat at the long wooden table, watching her family do what they did. Best, talk over each other while somehow still managing to listen. Her mom was telling the same story about her new neighbor's loud dog for the third time that day. Her dad kept checking his phone for baseball updates. This was exactly how every family gathering went. And honestly, Lisa wouldn't have it any other way. "Pass the mashed potatoes, honey," her sister Katie said, bouncing her baby on her lap while trying to eat with one hand. Katie had mastered the art of multitasking since becoming a mom 2 years ago. She could change a diaper, answer emails, and cook dinner all at the same time. It was actually pretty impressive. But it was Katie's other child who caught Lisa's attention today. 8-year-old Tommy sat quietly in the corner of the room, building something elaborate with his toy blocks. He was always the quiet one at these gatherings. While his cousins ran around making noise and demanding attention, Tommy preferred to stay in his own little world. He had these big, thoughtful eyes that seemed to notice everything, even when adults thought he wasn't paying attention. "That boy is too quiet for his own good," Grandma Rose had whispered to Lisa earlier while they were setting the table. "At his age, your Uncle Mike was climbing trees and breaking windows. This one just sits and watches everything like he's studying us." Lisa had laughed it off. Every family had that one kid who marched to their own beat. Tommy was just more observant than most children his age. He was the type of kid who would rather read a book than play video games, who asked questions that made adults pause and think. There was nothing wrong with that. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains that Grandma Rose had hung decades ago. They were probably older than Lisa herself, but Grandma Rose refused to replace them. "They still keep the light just right," she would say whenever anyone suggested updating the decor. The whole house was like that. Frozen in time, but in the most comforting way possible. Grandpa Joe's presence still lingered in every room, even though he had passed away 3 years ago. His reading glasses still sat on the side table next to his favorite armchair. His coffee mug, the one with the faded fishing logo, remained in its usual spot in the kitchen cabinet. Grandma Rose hadn't moved a single thing. She said it made her feel like he might walk through the door any minute. "Remember when Grandpa used to play piano after these Sunday dinners?" Aunt Linda said suddenly, gesturing toward the old upright piano that stood against the far wall. It was covered with family photos and hadn't been touched since Grandpa Joe's funeral. He would play those beautiful classical pieces while we all sat around feeling too full to move. Everyone smiled at the memory. Grandpa Joe had been quite the pianist in his younger days. Self-taught but incredibly talented. He could make that old piano sing in ways that brought tears to your eyes. Sunday evenings weren't complete without his music filling the house. "I miss that," Grandma Rose said softly, her eyes getting that distant look they always got when someone mentioned her late husband. "The house feels too quiet without his music." The conversation naturally shifted to other memories. Fishing, trips, holiday traditions, the time Grandpa Joe tried to fix the roof himself and ended up calling a professional anyway. These stories had been told hundreds of times, but nobody minded hearing them again. They were like a warm blanket on a cold day. Tommy continued building his block tower, seemingly oblivious to the adult conversation swirling around him. But Lisa noticed the way his head tilted slightly when Aunt Linda mentioned the piano. It was subtle, but there was definitely a reaction there. Kids were like that sometimes. They picked up on things you didn't expect them to understand. "More green beans, anyone?" Katie asked, trying to keep the conversation moving while her baby started getting fussy. "Mom made enough to feed an army, as usual." "I never know how many people will show up," Lisa's mom defended herself with a laugh. "Better to have too much food than not enough. Besides, you all love taking leftovers home." This was true. Half the appeal of Sunday dinner at Grandma Rose's was the containers of food everyone got to take home afterward. Lisa's fridge was usually stocked with her mom's cooking for the entire week following these gatherings. The baby's fussing grew louder. and Katie started that gentle, bouncing motion that all parents seem to learn instinctively. "Somebody's getting tired," she said, standing up to walk around the room. The movement seemed to calm the baby down a bit. "Here, let me take him," Aunt Linda offered, reaching out her arms. She had raised 4 kids of her own and had that magical touch that could soothe any crying child. "You finish eating while it's still warm." As Aunt Linda took the baby and started humming a soft lullaby, Tommy looked up from his blocks for the first time during dinner. He watched his aunt swaying gently with his baby brother, and something shifted in his expression. It was hard to describe, but his eyes seemed to focus on something beyond what everyone else could see. "Tommy, honey, are you going to eat some more?" Katie asked, noticing her son's empty plate. "Grandma Rose made your favorite, chicken and mashed potatoes." Tommy nodded but didn't move toward the table. Instead, he stood up slowly and looked around the room. His gaze lingered on the piano for a moment before moving to Grandma Rose, who was clearing some empty dishes. "Grandma," he said quietly, his small voice barely audible over the family chatter. It was the first word he had spoken since arriving at the house that afternoon. "What is it, sweetheart?" Grandma Rose replied, setting down the dishes and giving him her full attention. She had always been particularly gentle with Tommy, sensing his quiet nature and respecting it. Tommy pointed toward the piano in the corner. The afternoon light was hitting it just right, making the old wood gleam and highlighting the dust particles dancing in the air above the keys. "Can I play something?" he asked simply. The room went quiet for just a moment. Not the heavy, uncomfortable kind of quiet, but the surprised kind. Tommy had never shown any interest in music before. He had never taken piano lessons or even mentioned wanting to learn. His parents had offered to sign him up for music classes, but he had always shaken his head and chosen art classes instead. "Of course you can, honey," Grandma Rose said with a warm smile. "That piano hasn't been played in far too long. It would be nice to hear some music in this house again." Everyone turned to watch as Tommy walked slowly toward the piano bench. His steps were measured and careful, like he was approaching something sacred. Lisa found herself holding her breath, curious to see what her nephew would do. Probably play chopsticks or maybe make up some random melody. It would be cute either way. Tommy climbed onto the old piano bench and adjusted his position. He sat there for a moment, his small hands hovering over the keys, and looked back at his family with those big, thoughtful eyes that seemed to hold secrets too deep for an 8-year-old boy. Tommy's fingers touched the keys for the first time, and everyone expected to hear the usual sounds of a child exploring a piano. Random notes, maybe a simple tune, perhaps even some playful banging. Lisa smiled, ready to encourage whatever cute attempt her nephew was about to make. But what came out of that old piano made everyone freeze. The first note was clear and perfect, followed by another, then another. Not the hesitant pecking of a child learning to play, but smooth, confident notes that flowed together like water. Tommy's small hands moved across the keyboard with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Lisa felt her fork slip from her hand and clatter onto her plate. Around the table, similar sounds echoed as other family members stopped eating mid-bite. The melody that filled the room was hauntingly beautiful, a classical piece that none of them could name, but all of them felt deep in their chests. "What in the world?" Uncle Mike whispered, his football argument forgotten completely. Tommy's posture had changed the moment he started playing. Gone was the shy, quiet boy who had been building blocks in the corner. His back was straight, his head held high, and his fingers danced across the keys like he had been playing for decades. Each note was placed exactly where it belonged, with the kind of precision that took years of practice to achieve. Aunt Linda had stopped humming to the baby, who had also gone quiet, as if even he could sense that something extraordinary was happening. The only sound in the house was the piano, and it was singing in ways that made everyone's skin tingle. Katie stood up slowly from her chair, her mouth slightly open. "Tommy," she whispered, but her son didn't seem to hear her. He was completely absorbed in the music, his eyes closed now, swaying slightly with the rhythm as his hands continued their impossible dance. The melody was complex and layered, with intricate runs and delicate flourishes that would challenge even an experienced pianist. But Tommy played it all flawlessly, as if the music was flowing directly from his heart through his fingertips. There were moments of incredible softness, where the notes barely whispered through the air, followed by passages of such emotional intensity that they made Lisa's eyes water. "How is he doing this?" Lisa's father asked quietly, setting down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "He's never had a single lesson." But even as he spoke, everyone could see that this wasn't a child stumbling through a piece he had somehow memorized. This was someone who understood the music deeply, who felt every emotion the composer had intended. The way Tommy's hands moved showed a familiarity with the piano that went far beyond his 8 years of life. Grandma Rose had gone completely still in her chair. Her face had lost all color, and she was gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Lisa noticed her grandmother's reaction and felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Grandma Rose's expression that went beyond simple surprise. The music continued to pour from the piano, filling every corner of the house with its haunting beauty. It was the kind of piece that told a story without words. A story of love and loss, of memories cherished and time that had passed too quickly. The melody would rise to moments of pure joy, then drift down into passages so melancholy that they seemed to capture the very essence of missing someone. Lisa found herself thinking of Grandpa Joe, though she couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was because the piano had been his, or maybe it was the way the music seemed to bring his presence back into the room. She could almost picture him sitting at that same bench, his weathered hands moving across the same keys. Tommy's technique was flawless. His left hand maintained a steady, complex bass line, while his right hand carried the melody with such expressiveness that it seemed impossible. There were moments where he played so softly that everyone held their breath to hear, and other moments where the music swelled with such power that the old house seemed to vibrate with it. "This is impossible," Katie breathed, still standing frozen by her chair. "He's 8 years old. 8-year-olds don't play like this." But Tommy was playing like this, and everyone in the room was witnessing it. The music was so beautiful that it hurt to listen to, touching something deep inside each person that they had forgotten was there. It was the kind of performance that reminded you why music existed in the first place, to reach places that words could never go. Uncle Mike, who had never shown much interest in classical music, found himself leaning forward in his chair, completely captivated. His eyes were wide with disbelief, but he couldn't look away from his nephew's impossible performance. The boy's hands moved with such confidence that it looked like he had been born knowing this piece. Aunt Linda was crying now, though she probably didn't realize it. Tears were streaming down her face as she rocked the baby gently, both of them, mesmerized by the music. There was something about the melody that brought up memories of everything beautiful and sad that had ever happened, all mixed together in a way that was almost too much to bear. The piece seemed to have sections, like chapters in a book. There were passages that felt like spring mornings full of hope and new beginnings. Others felt like autumn evenings, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that all beautiful things must end. And throughout it all, there was an underlying theme that kept returning like a beloved face appearing in a crowd. Lisa realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to breathe normally. But the music made even breathing feel like an interruption. Every note was exactly where it should be, every pause perfectly timed. Tommy wasn't just playing the piece, he was living it, feeling every emotion and sharing it with everyone in the room. The afternoon light streaming through the lace curtains seemed to change as the music progressed, becoming softer and more golden. Or maybe it was just that the music made everything look different, the way a beautiful sunset could transform an ordinary landscape into something magical. As the piece moved toward what seemed like its conclusion, the melody became even more poignant. Tommy's hands moved with increasing emotion, drawing sounds from the old piano that it had never made before, or at least not for a very long time. Each note seemed to hang in the air a little longer, as if reluctant to fade away. Grandma Rose's breathing had become shallow and quick. She was staring at Tommy with an expression that was part wonder and part something else, something that looked almost like recognition. Her lips were moving slightly, as if she was trying to say something, but no words were coming out. The baby in Aunt Linda's arms had fallen completely asleep, lulled by the impossible beauty of his brother's playing. Even he seemed to understand that something extraordinary was happening, that this was a moment that would be remembered for the rest of their lives. Tommy's eyes remained closed as he played, his face peaceful and concentrated. There was no strain or effort visible in his expression, despite the complexity of what his hands were doing. It was as if the music was playing itself, using Tommy as its instrument rather than the other way around. And then, just as everyone thought they couldn't handle any more beauty, Tommy's hands began to slow. The final notes of the piece approached like the end of a perfect day, each one more precious because they knew it was almost over. The final note hung in the air like a whisper that didn't want to leave. Tommy's hands remained on the keys for a moment as if he was reluctant to break the connection. Then slowly, he lifted his fingers and opened his eyes. The spell was broken, but the silence that followed was almost as powerful as the music had been. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all just sat there trying to process what they had just witnessed. It was like waking up from the most vivid dream and trying to convince yourself it had really happened. Then Grandma Rose made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood up abruptly, her napkin falling to the ground. Her face had gone from pale to completely white, and her hands were shaking so badly that Lisa thought she might faint. "Grandma, are you okay?" Lisa asked, jumping up to steady her grandmother's arm. But Grandma Rose was staring at Tommy with an expression that sent chills down everyone's spine. It wasn't just surprise or amazement. It was something deeper, something that looked almost like fear mixed with impossible hope. "That song," Grandma Rose whispered, her voice barely audible. "That exact song." "What about it, Mom?" Lisa's mother asked, moving to Grandma Rose's other side. "What's wrong?" Grandma Rose couldn't seem to find the words. She kept staring at Tommy, who had turned around on the piano bench to face the family. He looked like a normal 8-year-old boy again, a little confused by all the attention he was getting. "It's Chopin," Grandma Rose finally managed to say. "Nocturne in E-flat major, but not just any version of it." She paused, struggling to breathe normally. "It was your grandfather's version, the way he used to play it." The room went even quieter, if that was possible. Everyone knew that Grandpa, Joe, had been a talented pianist, but they had never heard him play that particular piece. At least most of them hadn't. "I don't understand," Katie said, still standing by her chair. She looked at her son with a mixture of pride and confusion. "Tommy, where did you learn that song?" Tommy shrugged, the way kids do when adults ask them questions they can't really answer. "I just knew it," he said simply. "It felt like I'd played it before." But Grandma Rose was shaking her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No," she said firmly. "It wasn't just the song, it was exactly the way Joe played it. Every little change he made, every personal touch he added over the years. Nobody else knew those parts." Lisa felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "What do you mean, Grandma?" "Your grandfather learned that piece when we were first married over 40 years ago," Grandma Rose explained, her voice getting stronger as the memories came flooding back. "But he never played it the same way twice. He was always adding little things, changing small parts to make it his own. By the time we lost him, that piece had become completely unique. It was his signature." She walked slowly toward the piano, her legs unsteady. "He used to play it every single evening after dinner. For 40 years, I sat in that chair." She pointed to her favorite spot by the fireplace, "and listened to him play that exact version of that song." Uncle Mike cleared his throat. "But Mom, maybe Tommy heard Grandpa play it when he was younger. Kids remember more than we think they do." "Tommy was 5 when Grandpa Joe died," Katie said quietly. "And we didn't visit very often back then because of the distance, maybe a few times a year at most. Besides," Grandma Rose continued, her voice growing more emotional, "Joe never played for company. He was too shy about his music. He only played in the evenings when it was just the two of us." Tommy never would have heard him play that piece. Lisa's mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. But the more she thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. Tommy had played a complex classical piece with the skill of a master pianist. Not only that, but he had played it exactly the way his great-grandfather used to play it, including personal modifications that no one else had ever heard. Maybe he found sheet music somewhere, Aunt Linda suggested weakly, though she didn't sound convinced by her own words. Or maybe he watched videos online. But even as she said it, everyone knew that couldn't be right. Grandpa Joe had never written down his personal version of the piece. And Tommy didn't have access to the internet at home. Katie was very strict about screen time. Tommy was still sitting on the piano bench, swinging his legs and looking around at all the adults with their serious faces. He didn't seem to understand why everyone was so upset. To him, it had just been a song. "Tommy," Grandma Rose said gently, kneeling down so she was at his eye level. "Can you tell me how you knew that song? Did someone teach it to you?" Tommy thought for a moment, his forehead wrinkled in concentration. "I don't think so," he said slowly. When I saw the piano, I remembered playing it. Like when you remember a dream after you wake up." The way he said it made everyone's skin crawl. It was such an odd thing for a child to say. Kids didn't usually talk about remembering things they had never done. "What do you mean you remembered playing it?" Lisa asked, sitting down on the edge of the coffee table so she was closer to Tommy's level. "It felt like I used to play it all the time," Tommy explained, his voice matter-of-fact. "Like it was something I did every day. And I remembered..." He paused, looking around the room. "I remembered someone sitting over there listening." He pointed directly at Grandma Rose's chair by the fireplace, the same chair where she had sat every evening for 40 years, listening to her husband play that exact piece. Grandma Rose gasped and put her hand to her chest. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Mom, you're scaring me," Lisa's mother said. "What's going on?" But Grandma Rose was staring at Tommy like she was seeing a ghost. "The way he sits at the piano," she said slowly. "The way he holds his hands, the way he moves his head when he plays. It's exactly like Joe." Now everyone was looking back and forth between Tommy and Grandma Rose. The little boy was still sitting there innocently, but something about the whole situation was making everyone deeply uncomfortable. "That's impossible, Mom," Uncle Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. "People don't just inherit musical ability that specifically. And they don't inherit memories," Katie added, though she was looking at her son with new eyes. "Tommy, are you sure you've never heard that song before?" Tommy nodded confidently. "I'm sure, but I know I've played it before. Lots of times." He looked around the room again, his gaze lingering on things that caught his attention. "This room looks different than I remember, though." "Different how?" Grandma Rose asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tommy pointed to the wall where a large, flat-screen TV now hung. There used to be a big bookshelf there with lots of old books, and the curtains were blue, not white. He pointed to the lace curtains that Grandma Rose had hung 15 years ago, replacing the blue ones that had belonged to her mother-in-law. Grandma Rose's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. "Those blue curtains," she said faintly. "We took them down when we redecorated. That was over 10 years ago, long before Tommy was even born." The room was so quiet that everyone could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. It was the same clock that had been in the house for decades, marking time through all the family gatherings, all the Sunday dinners, all the evenings, when Grandpa Joe had played piano while Grandma Rose listened from her favorite chair. Tommy swung his legs cheerfully, completely unaware of the storm of confusion and fear he had stirred up in the adults around him. To him, this was just another family gathering, just another Sunday afternoon. He had no idea that he had just shattered everything his family thought they knew about life and death, and the mysteries that lay between them. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. Everyone was staring at Tommy, who was now humming softly to himself while examining the piano keys more closely. He seemed completely unaware that he had just described things about the house that should have been impossible for him to know. Lisa's father was the first to break the silence. "There has to be an explanation," he said, though his voice sounded less confident than his words. "Kids pick up on things. Maybe he saw old photos somewhere." But even as he said it, Lisa could see the doubt in his eyes. What kind of photos would show the exact placement of furniture from over a decade ago? And how would that explain Tommy's incredible piano playing, Tommy? Katie said carefully, moving closer to her son. "Can you tell us more about what you remember? About this room being different?" Tommy looked up from the piano keys, his big eyes thoughtful. "Well," he said slowly, "the walls used to be a different color too. Kind of yellow, like butter. And there was a big rug in the middle of the room with flowers on it." Grandma Rose made a choking sound. "The Persian rug," she whispered. "We had a Persian rug with roses on it. Joe's mother gave it to us as a wedding gift. We got rid of it when we put in the hardwood floors." "When was that?" Lisa asked, though she was starting to dread the answer. 18 years ago, Grandma Rose replied faintly. "Long before any of the grandchildren were born." Tommy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I remember that rug. It was soft under my feet when I would walk to the piano." He slid off the bench and walked to the center of the room, his small feet making soft sounds on the hardwood. The piano bench was different too. It had a cushion that was all worn out on one side. Uncle Mike's coffee cup slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor, the sound making everyone jump. But nobody moved to clean it up. They were all too focused on Tommy, who was describing details about their family home that he absolutely could not know. "The cushion," Grandma Rose said in a voice so quiet they could barely hear her. "Joe always sat on the left side of the bench. For 40 years he wore down that one spot until the cushion was completely flat. We threw it away when we bought the new bench." Tommy walked back to the piano and climbed onto the current bench, which was a simple wooden one with no cushion. "This one is okay," he said matter-of-factly, "but the old one was more comfortable. I used to adjust it just right before I played." The way he said "I used to" sent chills through everyone in the room. He wasn't talking like a child who had heard stories. He was talking like someone who had actually lived these experiences. Aunt Linda was crying again, but this time it wasn't from the beauty of the music. "This is impossible," she kept saying over and over. "This is absolutely impossible." Tommy turned around on the bench to face his family again. For a moment, his expression changed. The innocent, childlike look in his eyes was replaced by something deeper, something that seemed far too old for his face. "Rose," he said quietly, looking directly at his great-grandmother. "You still sit in the same chair." The use of her first name, spoken in that gentle, familiar tone, made Grandma Rose gasp. It was exactly the way her husband used to say her name when he spoke to her from the piano bench during his evening performances. "Joe?" she whispered, her voice breaking. But just as quickly as it had appeared, that strange, older expression vanished from Tommy's face. He looked confused again, like a normal 8-year-old who didn't understand why all the adults were acting so strange. "My name is Tommy," he said with a little laugh. "Joe is my great-grandpa. I never met him because he died before I was born." The matter-of-fact way he said it made everything even more unsettling. How could he switch so easily between having impossible memories and being a normal child who knew perfectly well that his great-grandfather was dead? Katie sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her face pale. "I think I need some air," she said weakly. "This is too much. There has to be a logical explanation." But Lisa could see that even Katie was struggling to find one. They all were. Every rational explanation they came up with crumbled when faced with the evidence of what they had just witnessed. "Tommy," Lisa said gently, "when you were playing the piano, what were you thinking about?" Tommy considered this question seriously. "I was thinking about how much I missed playing," he said. "And I was thinking about Rose sitting in her chair listening. I always loved playing for her." The casual way he said, "I always loved playing for her," made everyone's blood run cold. He was talking about his great-grandmother as if he had known her for years, as if he had a lifetime of memories with her. "Tommy, you've only met Grandma Rose a few times," his mother said carefully. You don't really know her that well. But, Tommy shook his head confidently, I know her very well. She likes her tea with 2 sugars and just a little bit of milk. She always worried when I stayed up too late reading, and she used to fall asleep in her chair sometimes while I was playing, but she always woke up when I finished. Grandma Rose's hand flew to her mouth. Every detail was correct. She did take her tea exactly that way. Her husband had always been a night owl, reading until very late, and she had worried about him not getting enough sleep. And yes, she had sometimes dozed off during his evening piano sessions, but she always made sure to be awake when he finished so she could tell him how beautiful it had been. How do you know all this? Uncle Mike asked, his voice hoarse. Tommy, how could you possibly know these things? Tommy looked genuinely puzzled by the question. I just know, he said with a shrug. The same way I know how to play piano. I just remember. But you can't remember things that happened before you were born, Lisa's father said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as Tommy. I don't understand why everyone is so upset, Tommy said, sliding off the piano bench again. I just played a song. Grandpa Joe used to play it all the time. I wanted to play it too. The way he said Grandpa Joe was different from how he had said it before. There was a familiarity in his voice, an affection that spoke of a close relationship. But Tommy had never met his great-grandfather. It was impossible. Grandma Rose stood up slowly, her legs still shaky. She walked over to Tommy and knelt down in front of him, looking directly into his eyes. Tommy, she said softly, do you remember anything else about playing piano in this room? Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, lots of things. I remember how the light from that window would shine on the keys in the afternoon. And I remember how you would always applaud when I finished playing, even if I made mistakes. Tears were streaming down Grandma Rose's face now. Joe never made mistakes, she whispered. Not in 40 years of playing. But he always worried that he had. Tommy reached out and patted Grandma Rose's hand with his small one. Don't cry, Rose, he said gently. I'm here now. I can play for you again. The tenderness in his voice, the gentle way he comforted her, was exactly like her husband. For a moment it was as if Joe himself was speaking through this 8-year-old boy, offering the same kind of love and reassurance he had given her for 40 years of marriage. But then, Tommy's expression changed again, becoming confused and a little worried. Why is everyone crying? He asked in his normal child's voice. Did I do something wrong? Nobody knew how to answer Tommy's question. Did he do something wrong? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that he had just done something impossible? That he had somehow accessed memories that belonged to someone else, someone who had died before he was even born? Grandma Rose wiped her tears and tried to compose herself. No, sweetheart, she said gently. You didn't do anything wrong. You played beautifully, it's just that your playing reminded me of someone very special. Tommy smiled, the innocent expression back on his face. I'm glad you liked it. I think I'd like to play more songs, but I'm getting hungry. Can I have some more chicken? Just like that, he was a normal child again, thinking about food and completely unaware of the emotional chaos he had created. Katie stood up quickly, grateful for the chance to focus on something ordinary. Of course, honey, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Let's get you a plate. As Tommy skipped back to the dining table, chattering about how good the mashed potatoes were, the adults remained frozen in place. Nobody knew what to say or how to process what they had just experienced. Lisa's mother was the first to speak. We need to talk about this, she said quietly. But not here, not in front of Tommy. They all understood. Whatever was happening with Tommy, he didn't seem aware of how unusual it was. There was no point in frightening him or making him feel like something was wrong with him. Mom, why don't you take Tommy into the kitchen and get him some more food? Katie suggested. Maybe he can help you with dessert. As soon as Tommy was out of earshot, everyone gathered in a tight circle in the living room. The piano sat silently in the corner, but its presence seemed larger now, more significant. It was no longer just a piece of furniture covered in family photos. It had become something mysterious, something that had somehow connected the past to the present in a way that defied explanation. "Okay," Uncle Mike said, running his hands through his hair. "Let's think about this logically. What exactly do we know for sure? We know that Tommy played a complex classical piece perfectly, despite never having lessons," Lisa said. "We know he played it exactly the way Grandpa Joe used to play it, including personal modifications that nobody else ever heard. We know he described furniture and decorations that were in this house before he was born," Aunt Linda added, "details that we never would have talked about in front of him. And we know he spoke to me like he knew me," Grandma Rose said quietly. "Like we had a lifetime of shared experiences. The way he said my name, the way he comforted me. It was exactly like Joe." Katie shook her head. "But that's impossible. People don't just inherit someone else's memories. There has to be another explanation." "What explanation?" Lisa's father asked. "We've been through all the logical possibilities. None of them work." Uncle Mike started pacing around the room. "Maybe he's just really gifted. Maybe he's some kind of musical prodigy who picked up on things subconsciously." "Prodigies still need to learn," Grandma Rose said firmly. "They need lessons and practice. Tommy has never touched a piano before today. I would stake my life on that." Lisa looked toward the kitchen, where they could hear Tommy chattering happily with her mother about cookies. "What if," she started, then stopped herself. "What if what?" Katie asked. "What if there's something we don't understand about how memory works, about how consciousness works?" Lisa said carefully. "What if there are things about life and death that science hasn't figured out yet?" The room went quiet again. Nobody wanted to say what they were all thinking, but the words hung in the air anyway. What if Tommy somehow carried parts of his great-grandfather's soul? What if love and connection could transcend death in ways they had never imagined? "That's crazy," Uncle Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Grandma Rose asked. "Is it crazier than what we just witnessed? Is it crazier than an 8-year-old boy playing like a master pianist and knowing things about our family that only Joe could have known?" Katie sat down heavily on the couch. "If that's true," she said slowly, "then what does it mean? What does it mean for Tommy? What does it mean for our family?" Nobody had an answer for that. They were all trying to navigate territory that had no maps to understand something that their minds could barely accept. "Maybe it doesn't have to mean anything more than what we saw today," Lisa suggested. "Maybe it's just a gift, a way for Grandpa Joe to let us know that love doesn't end when someone dies." Grandma Rose nodded slowly. "Joe always believed that the people we love never really leave us. He used to say that love was the one thing that could survive anything, even death. Maybe this is his way of proving that." From the kitchen, they could hear Tommy laughing at something Lisa's mother had said. The sound was pure and innocent, exactly what you would expect from a happy child. But now they all heard something else in it too, an echo of another laugh, another voice, another person who had brought joy to this house for so many years. "So what do we do now?" Aunt Linda asked. "Do we tell people about this? Do we try to study it somehow?" "Absolutely not," Katie said firmly. "Tommy is still my son, and I won't have him turned into some kind of science experiment or circus act. If this is real, if there's really something of Grandpa Joe and Tommy, then it's private. It's family." Everyone nodded in agreement. Whatever was happening with Tommy, it was too precious and too mysterious to share with the outside world. Some things were meant to be kept safe within the family, treasured like the most valuable secrets. "Besides," Grandma Rose said with a small smile, "Joe was always a private person. He wouldn't want a lot of fuss made over this. He'd just want to know that his music could still bring happiness to the people he loved." Tommy came running back into the room then, his face bright with excitement. "Grandma made chocolate chip cookies," he announced. "She said I can have 2 if I eat all my vegetables first." He plopped down on the floor and started building with his blocks again, humming softly under his breath. It was the same melody he had played on the piano, but simplified, the way a child might remember a complex song. As the family slowly returned to normal conversation, As plates were cleared and coffee was poured, life began to feel ordinary again. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about life and death, and the bonds that connect us to the people we love. Tommy continued to build his block tower, completely absorbed in his play. But every now and then he would look up at the piano with the expression of quiet satisfaction, as if he had accomplished something important. And sometimes, when he thought nobody was looking, he would catch Grandma Rose's eye and smile in a way that seemed far too knowing for an 8-year-old boy. As the afternoon wore on and the family gradually prepared to leave, Grandma Rose sat in her favorite chair watching Tommy play. For the first time since her husband's death, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of love and mystery, and the possibility that some connections are so strong that not even death can break them. And, in the corner, the old piano sat waiting patiently for the next time Tommy would remember how to make it sing.